The road disappeared before the army understood the trap. It was not a battlefield in the Roman sense. There was no open plain waiting for a clean deployment, no enemy line standing in the distance, no clear place for cavalry to maneuver, infantry to form, or commanders to see the shape of the fight. There was only forest, rain, mud, narrow tracks, wagons, pack animals, civilians, soldiers, and a column of Roman power stretched too thin through hostile land. Then the trees began to move. Javelins came from the slopes. Spears struck from cover. Men fell before they could see who had thrown the weapon. Units tried to turn, but the line of march was too long. Shields locked in one place while others panicked far behind. Officers shouted orders that could not travel through rain and noise. The army of Publius Quinctilius Varus, governor and commander in Germania, had entered the forest as the instrument of Roman authority. It would not come out as an army. In the year 9 after Christ, somewhere in the lands east of the Rhine, 3 Roman legions were destroyed by a coalition of Germanic warriors led by Arminius, a Cheruscan nobleman who had Roman citizenship, Roman military experience, and the trust of the very system he helped deceive. The disaster would become known to Roman writers as the Clades Variana, the Varian disaster. It did not end the Roman Empire. It did not destroy Augustus. It did not mean Rome never crossed the Rhine again, but it stopped something colder and more specific, the Roman attempt to turn much of Germania beyond the Rhine into a secure province of the empire. After Teutoburg, Rome would punish, raid, recover standards, and win battles east of the river. But the great Augustan project of permanent conquest in free Germania was broken. The Rhine, not the Elbe, would become the lasting frontier. That is why the ambush mattered. It did not stop Rome everywhere. It stopped Rome cold in the German forests. Our knowledge of the battle comes mainly from Roman authors, including Velleius Paterculus, Tacitus, Cassius Dio, Suetonius, and Florus, all writing from Roman perspectives and often with moral or political purposes. They were not neutral reporters standing beside the battlefield. Some wrote years or generations later. Their descriptions carry grief, blame, drama, and the Roman need to explain how 3 legions could vanish in land that Augustus believed was being brought under control. Archaeology, especially finds associated with Kalkriese in modern Lower Saxony, has added a material dimension to the story. Military debris, Roman equipment, coins, and evidence of fighting in a narrow corridor. But even with archaeology, many details remain debated. The exact route, the full size of the armies, and the precise sequence of the fighting cannot be reconstructed with complete certainty. The broad outline is clear. Varus trusted Arminius. Arminius led him into prepared danger. And a Roman army was destroyed far from the safety of the Rhine. To understand Teutoburg, we have to begin with Rome's confidence under Augustus. After decades of civil war, Augustus presented himself as the restorer of order. The Roman world had been exhausted by the struggles of Caesar, Pompey, Antony, Octavian, and the armies that followed them. When Augustus emerged as the first emperor in all but name, he offered stability. But Roman stability still rested on military power. Frontiers had to be secured. Prestige had to be maintained. The empire had to look as if it were not merely surviving, but mastering the world around it. In the west and north, that meant the Rhine, the Danube, and the lands beyond them. Germania was not a single nation. It was a vast and varied region of tribes, confederations, settlements, forests, rivers, marshes, fields, and shifting alliances. Roman writers often described its peoples through broad stereotypes: fierce, free, poor, warlike, undisciplined. Those descriptions tell us as much about Roman imagination as about Germanic reality. The communities beyond the Rhine had their own politics, rivalries, hierarchies, trade relationships, and strategies for dealing with Rome. Some fought Rome, some traded with Rome, some served Rome, some did all three at different times. That complexity mattered. Rome did not conquer only by battle. It used roads, forts, diplomacy, hostage-taking, subsidies, local allies, market access, military recruitment, and the prestige of imperial power. In many frontier zones, conquest was not a single event. It was a process. First raids, then treaties, then forts, then taxation, then legal authority, then local elites drawn into the Roman system. By the early 1st century after Christ, Rome had pushed deep into Germania. Campaigns under Drusus and Tiberius had carried Roman arms east of the Rhine. Forts and routes were established. Diplomatic relationships were built. Some Germanic elites received Roman favor. Others served as auxiliary officers. From the Roman point of view, Germania could appear to be moving toward provincial status, but appearance was not control. A land can be crossed without being possessed. A tribe can submit one year and rebel the next. A noble can accept Roman honors and still remember that Rome is a foreign power. Arminius stood at the center of this contradiction. He was a Cheruscan nobleman, raised or trained within the Roman world to some degree, granted citizenship and equestrian rank, and familiar with Roman military practices. He had served in Roman forces. He understood their strengths: discipline, formation, camps, roads, command hierarchy, and the psychological confidence of an army used to victory. That understanding made him dangerous. Arminius did not defeat Rome because he was outside Roman influence. He defeated Rome because he had learned from it. Varus, by contrast, represented the administrative face of empire. Publius Quinctilius. Varus was not an obscure fool dragged from nowhere into command. He was a man of high status, connected to the imperial world, experienced in provincial government, and previously active in Syria. Roman sources later treated him harshly, sometimes portraying him as arrogant, greedy, or blind. Some criticism may be justified. But we should be careful. Defeated commanders often become containers for everything a society wants to blame. Varus made mistakes, but he also inherited a dangerous illusion that Germania was already far enough under Roman authority to be governed like a province. Before we continue, consider subscribing to Ashes of Empire. It helps this channel grow and helps us keep improving the quality of these forgotten war documentaries. In the year 9 after Christ, Varus was leading 3 legions, traditionally identified as the 17th, 18th, and 19th. Along with auxiliary troops, cavalry, baggage, servants, and likely civilians connected to the army. The total number is debated, but the destroyed force may have included around 15,000 to 20,000 people, possibly more if non-combatants are counted. Ancient figures should be treated cautiously, but the scale was enormous. 3 legions represented not just soldiers, but institutional identity, standards, officers, and years of investment. The army was moving toward winter quarters when Arminius brought news of a local uprising. According to the Roman tradition, he persuaded Varus to divert the army from its safer route and move through difficult country to suppress the supposed rebellion. This was the trap. Arminius and his allies had prepared the conditions for an ambush, using their knowledge of terrain and Varus's trust against him. The plan required more than courage. It required coordination among Germanic groups that did not always share interests. Arminius needed enough support to attack a Roman army, enough secrecy to hide the plan, and enough timing to strike when the Roman column was most vulnerable. Later, memory turned him into a national hero, especially in modern German traditions that called him Hermann. But in his own time, he was not the leader of a German nation. He was a Cheruscan noble working within a landscape of tribal alliances, rivalries, and immediate political danger. His achievement was not national unity in the modern sense. It was temporary coalition against Roman power. The Roman army moved into difficult terrain. This is where the disaster began before the first major blow landed. A legion was at its strongest when it could march in order, build a fortified camp, deploy into formation, and bring its heavy infantry to bear. But a long marching column was vulnerable. Soldiers had to protect baggage. Units stretched out over distance. The road narrowed. Rain and mud made movement harder. Forest limited visibility. Commanders could not easily see or control the whole army. In such conditions, Roman discipline still mattered, but it could not solve everything. The Germanic attackers did not need to stand in the open and challenge the legions fairly. They struck from cover. They attacked along the column. They targeted weak points. They used the environment to reduce the Roman army from a concentrated force into fragments of suffering. The battle likely unfolded over several days, not as one sudden massacre in a single hour. This matters because it shows how the destruction worked. The Romans resisted. They built camps. They tried to break out. They attempted to maintain order. This was not a story of soldiers instantly throwing down their arms. It was a slow collapse under continuous pressure, difficult terrain, bad weather, and the loss of command flexibility. Varus's army had to keep moving, but every movement exposed it. At some point, the Romans appear to have tried to abandon some baggage and form more effectively. They may have reached more open ground briefly, only to be drawn again into constricted terrain. The sources are not precise enough to map every stage, but the pattern is clear. Arminius and his allies refused to let the Romans recover the conditions under which the legions were strongest. They made the army fight as a column. They made the column bleed. The most likely archaeological location for the final phase of the fighting is Calchris, near the Vihen Hills. There, the landscape offered a narrow passage between higher ground and wet lowlands. Archaeological discoveries suggest a place where Romans were forced through restricted terrain, vulnerable to attack from one side, and unable to maneuver freely. Finds of Roman military equipment and other artifacts support the identification of the area as part of the Varian disaster, though scholarly discussion continues over exactly how the site fits into the larger battle. If Calchris was the killing ground, the tactical logic is brutal. A Roman army, already weakened, was funneled through a corridor where its numbers became less useful. The Germanic warriors could attack from prepared positions, possibly including earthworks or barriers. The Romans could not properly deploy. Their training, armor, and discipline still mattered man by man, but their system had been broken. Rome did not lose because legionaries forgot how to fight. Rome lost because the battle denied the legions the space to become themselves. The rain made everything worse. Shields grew heavy, roads turned unstable. Bowstrings, javelins, armor, cloaks, pack animals, wagons, and wounded men all became part of the same slowing mass. Officers could not easily coordinate. The army could not pause safely for long, but movement led deeper into danger. Every attempt to escape created new exposure. The psychological pressure must have been severe. Roman soldiers were trained to endure fear, but they were also trained to trust the structure around them: the camp, the standard, the centurion, the legion, the line, the command. In Teutoburg, that structure was under attack from the terrain itself. Men could hear fighting ahead and behind. They could see comrades fall without seeing the full enemy. They could not know whether the next turn in the track led to safety or another ambush. The standards became critical symbols. The eagle of a legion was sacred to its identity. To protect it was to protect the honor of the unit. To lose it was disgrace. In the chaos of Teutoburg, the standards of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions were lost to the enemy. The numbers of those legions would not be reused by Rome in the same way afterward. That absence became its own memorial. As the disaster became irreversible, Varus took his own life. Roman commanders sometimes chose suicide when capture meant humiliation, torture, or use as enemy propaganda. Varus's death did not save the army, but it prevented his living capture. Other officers did the same. Some soldiers tried to flee. Some were cut down, some were captured. Some may have been sacrificed or enslaved. A small number escaped to bring the news west. The army was gone, not defeated, and regrouping. Gone. If you want more forgotten conflicts where power collapsed not from weakness, but from being forced into the wrong ground, subscribe to Ashes of Empire. The most decisive battles are often the ones that turn an army's strengths against it. The aftermath horrified Rome. Suetonius later wrote that Augustus was so shaken by the disaster that he cried out for Varus to give him back his legions. The famous scene may be stylized, but it captures the shock. Augustus had spent his reign presenting Rome as restored, ordered, and favored by victory. Teutoburg struck at that image. It was not a border skirmish. It was the destruction of 3 legions in a region Rome believed it was mastering. The Roman response was immediate and cautious. The Rhine frontier was reinforced. Panic spread that Germanic forces might cross into Gaul. The fear was not irrational. If the tribes had united and pushed west quickly, Roman territory could have faced a serious crisis. But the Germanic coalition did not become a permanent centralized state. Arminius had won a great victory, but victory did not give him unlimited command over all Germanic peoples. Tribal politics remained complex. Rival leaders still made their own calculations. This was one reason Rome survived the shock. The empire had lost an army, but its enemy had not become an empire. In the years that followed, Roman forces returned across the Rhine. Tiberius and later Germanicus conducted campaigns into Germania. These operations punished tribes, recovered some lost standards, buried remains of the dead, and won battlefield successes. Tacitus describes Germanicus visiting the site of the disaster years later, where Roman bones still lay scattered and grim signs of defeat remained. The scene became part of Rome's memory of the battle, not only a military loss, but a desecrated landscape of imperial failure. Germanicus fought Arminius and his allies in later campaigns. Rome showed that it could still project power beyond the Rhine. It could burn settlements, win engagements, and impose fear. The Roman army remained formidable. Teutoburg had not revealed Rome as weak. It had revealed that conquest of Germania would be costly, uncertain, and politically questionable. Eventually, Augustus and his successors accepted a different frontier logic. The Rhine would become the major boundary. Rome did not withdraw from all contact with Germania. Far from it. Trade, diplomacy, recruitment, raids, subsidies, and military campaigns continued. Roman influence crossed the river in many forms. Germanic warriors served in Roman armies. Roman goods moved beyond the frontier. Forts and roads developed on the Roman side. The border was not a wall between worlds. It was a zone of exchange and violence. But Rome did not turn the lands between the Rhine and the Elbe into stable imperial provinces. That is the consequence behind the title. Teutoburg stopped Rome cold, not because Roman soldiers never marched east again, but because the dream of fully absorbing free Germania into the empire lost its strategic foundation. The cost had become visible. The political will weakened. Other frontiers demanded attention. The empire chose consolidation over endless forest war. This decision shaped Europe. Had Rome permanently conquered Germania to the Elbe, the cultural and political development of northern Europe might have taken a different path. Latin administration, Roman urbanism, taxation, law, roads, and settlement patterns might have extended deeper into regions that remained outside direct imperial rule. Instead, much of Germania developed beyond the Roman provincial system, though never beyond Roman influence. The long-term consequences were not immediate or simple. It would be misleading to draw a straight line from Teutoburg to the fall of the Western Roman Empire centuries later. The Germanic groups of the 4th and 5th centuries were not the same political communities as Arminius's coalition. The world changed enormously between Augustus and late antiquity. But the Rhine frontier, created by Rome's decision after Teutoburg, became one of the defining lines of imperial Europe. On one side stood provinces shaped by Roman law, cities, roads, taxation, and imperial institutions. On the other side stood societies that interacted with Rome without being fully governed by it. That difference mattered for centuries. Arminius himself did not live as a simple liberator crowned by permanent success. After the victory, he remained trapped in the politics of his own world. He tried to maintain influence among the Cherusci and other groups, but rivalries continued. His position alarmed other Germanic nobles who feared his power. Eventually, he was killed by members of his own extended political world. Tacitus later admired him as the liberator of Germania, but his own life ended not in imperial triumph, but in internal conflict. This is important because Teutoburg has often been turned into myth. In later German memory, especially in the 19th century, Arminius became Hermann, a symbol of national resistance against foreign domination. Monuments, paintings, political speeches, and nationalist histories transformed the battle into a founding moment for a German people that did not exist in that form in the 1st century. In the 20th century, darker political movements also tried to claim the memory of Teutoburg for racial and nationalist mythology. That is not history. The battle was real. Its consequences were real. But Arminius was not leading a modern nation. The Germanic tribes were not a unified people with one identity or destiny. Rome was not fighting Germany. It was fighting a coalition of groups in a frontier region where loyalty, resistance, and survival were constantly negotiated. To remember Teutoburg accurately, we have to strip away later myth without reducing the battle's importance. It was not the birth of Germany. It was a catastrophic Roman defeat that changed imperial policy. That is enough. The scale of the disaster lies in the 3 legions. A legion was more than manpower. It was training, tradition, command structure, logistical investment, and symbolic power. To lose 1 legion was a serious blow. To lose 3 in a single campaign was a strategic trauma. The 17th, 18th, and 19th did not simply suffer casualties. They disappeared as fighting institutions. Their destruction also exposed the danger of assuming that administration could outrun control. Varus seems to have behaved as though Germania was ready for Roman governance. Taxes, legal authority, and provincial habits may have been imposed too quickly or too confidently. Arminius understood that beneath the surface of submission lay resentment and opportunity. Rome had built a frontier system that depended on local cooperation. Arminius turned local cooperation into deception. He used Roman trust as a weapon. This was the coldest part of the ambush. The Germanic warriors did not defeat the Romans by pure force alone. They defeated them through intelligence. They knew the ground, they knew the route, they knew the weather and the forests. They knew when the Roman army would be most stretched out and least able to deploy. Arminius knew enough about Roman expectations to make Varus believe he was marching to suppress a rebellion, not entering one. The ambush was therefore not primitive fury against civilization, as older stereotypes sometimes imagined. It was strategy. Rome had often used division, diplomacy, and local allies to conquer others. At Teutoburg, those methods were reversed against Rome. A man shaped partly by Roman military culture used that knowledge to defeat a Roman army. The irony was not lost on later writers, nor was the humiliation. Ashes of Empire follows the battles, sieges, and ambushes that left empires facing the limits of their power. Subscribe to keep exploring the wars that history never fully buried. The Roman dead in Teutoburg became part of the landscape of memory. Years later, when Germanicus's soldiers reached the battlefield, they found remains that had not received proper burial. For Romans, burial mattered deeply. To see the bones of fellow soldiers scattered in enemy country was not only sorrowful, it was a sign that the order Rome claimed to bring had been overturned. The living army buried the dead, but it could not undo the defeat. Rome recovered some of the standards in later campaigns. It avenged parts of the humiliation. It proved that Arminius had not made Germania untouchable. But revenge is not the same as restoration. The original project was gone. The Elbe frontier imagined by Augustan strategy faded. The Rhine became the practical line. This is why Teutoburg remains one of Rome's most consequential defeats. Cannae killed more Romans, but Rome eventually destroyed Carthage. Carrhae humiliated Rome in the east, but the rivalry with Parthia continued across a contested frontier. Teutoburg did something different. It changed the shape of the empire's ambition. It convinced Rome, slowly but decisively, that some lands were not worth the cost of permanent occupation. A power built on expansion learned to stop, not everywhere, but there. The phrase "stopped Rome cold" should not be taken as a claim that Rome became passive. The empire continued expanding in other directions. Britain would be invaded under Claudius. Dacia would be conquered under Trajan. The Roman state remained aggressive, adaptive, and dangerous, but in Germania, after the blood of Varus's legions, conquest gave way to containment. The forest had imposed a calculation. The battle also reminds us that imperial frontiers are not drawn only by emperors. They are drawn by those who resist, negotiate, ambush, mislead, and survive beyond the edge of maps. Augustus could imagine Germania as a province. Roman administrators could speak as if rule had already begun. Forts could be built, roads could be marked, treaties could be signed. But until power can move safely through a land, power is not complete. Varus discovered that too late. The men who died with him were not abstractions. They were legionaries, auxiliaries, officers, servants, drivers, and camp followers caught in a collapsing column. Some had probably spent years under the standards. Some were local auxiliaries serving Rome for pay, status, or obligation. Some may have believed they were marching through pacified territory. Their final days were spent in mud, confusion, and narrowing hope. The Germanic warriors who attacked them were also not shadows in the trees. They were men defending interests, status, autonomy, and local worlds threatened by Roman expansion. Their victory was violent, coordinated, and politically meaningful. It was not simply destruction. It was refusal. At Teutoburg, two systems met in a place where one could not function properly. Rome brought the legion, the standard, the road, the law, the camp, and the confidence of empire. Arminius brought terrain, timing, deception, coalition, and patience. The forest chose the second language. In the end, the Roman Empire survived because it was larger than one disaster. Augustus mourned, reinforced, recalculated, and continued to rule. The Rhine armies were rebuilt. The imperial system endured. The Roman world remained the greatest power in the Mediterranean. But something had changed. The empire had learned that not every frontier could be transformed by will. Not every people drawn into alliance had been absorbed. Not every road led to a province. Some roads led into forests where the map ended, the column stretched, and the emperor's authority could no longer be heard over rain and shouting. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest endures because it reveals Rome at the edge of its method. The legions were not beaten in a fair contest on ground of their choosing. They were taken apart in the wrong place, under the wrong assumptions, by an enemy who understood both Roman strength and Roman blindness. That is why the defeat was so difficult to absorb. It was not only that Rome lost men, it lost certainty. Beyond the Rhine, the empire could still punish. It could still burn. It could still win. But it would not possess. The forest had made its argument in blood, and after Teutoburg, Rome listened. The 17th, 18th, and 19th legions vanished into mud, trees, and memory. Their standards were taken. Their commander died by his own hand. Their bones waited years for burial. Their loss traveled back to Augustus as the kind of news no empire wants to hear. Not that an enemy had won a battle, but that a frontier had rejected the future Rome had planned for it. The ambush did not end Rome. It ended Rome's dream of Germania. And in the silence after the last Roman formation broke, the Rhine began to harden into one of history's most consequential borders.